Welcome to GODSpeed, where truth meets life in under 10 minutes. I'm AK, and this is hope for your journey.
When was the last time you tried something for the first time? And not something small like a new restaurant. I mean, something that made your heart drop. Something that asked you to step into a version of yourself you hadn't even met yet. Well, today we're going to talk about what happens when something new finds you. Jesus is preparing to begin his life's work, his mission. And he's going to recruit people who would help spread this thing called the gospel, which translates to mean good news. But considering the size of what he's about to do, who he chooses is surprising. He doesn't go find scholars. He doesn't call the rich or the connected. He actually walks to the edge of a lake and calls out to a group of fishermen. Regular, working people in the middle of an ordinary day. So let's jump in there. This comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 4, verses 18 through 23. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little farther up the shore, he saw two other brothers, James and John, sitting in a boat with their father Zebedee, repairing their nets, and he called them to come, too. They immediately followed him, leaving the boat and their father behind. Jesus traveled throughout the region of Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and announcing the good news about the kingdom. You will never feel ready for the day your life changes. And that's okay. Look at how sudden the shift was in this story. These men were not preparing for a career change. Simon and Andrew were caught at the moment. They were literally throwing their nets into the water for their next catch. James and John were sitting down repairing theirs. This was a regular work day. Nothing about that morning had told them their lives were about to shift permanently. See, Jesus didn't send an invitation weeks in advance. He didn't give them a timeline or a transition plan. He just said, "Follow me." And if I can be honest with you guys, I'm a goal setter. I like to plan these nice, neat transitions. I like to see where I'm going before I take my first steps. But this story shows us that calling trumps comfort and our timelines. Sometimes the new thing doesn't wait for you to finish preparing, it just shows up. And the only decision you get is whether or not you'll go. Now, to understand why this story and what these men did was significant, you have to understand the world they lived in. So in this time period, people didn't just choose career paths the way we think about it today. You inherited them. If your father was a fisherman, you were a fisherman. It was the family business. You would have been trained in it since childhood, surrounded by it, had friends in it, even smelled like it. Your entire identity was tied to this thing you did. So when Jesus says, "Follow me," he's not just asking them to try a new job. He's asking them to release their entire identity. Their boats, their nets, their relationships, the way the world knew them, all of it was wrapped up in being a fisherman. And they walked away from it. But here's the upside down good thing we should take away. The skills they built in their old life were exactly what they needed for the new one. See, fishermen in this region would be comfortable navigating different cultures because of the time they spent in the marketplace. They understood patience because fishing demanded it. They knew collaboration because you couldn't manage those big nets filled with fish alone. And they weren't afraid of hard labor or long nights in times where they had nothing to show for it. Jesus looked at them and saw everything he needed for the mission. Not in spite of what they'd been, but actually because of it. The character they developed in their old identity, the skills they learned, were the exact strengths required for their new lives. They just had to be willing to change what they aimed to catch. And I know what that crossroad feels like. I've stood at them and I know you probably have too. So there was a day where the identity I held for as long as I could remember was no longer true. So in college basketball, every year in the spring after the season, we connect with the head coach and we talk about the future in one-on-one meetings. What we saw for the next year, what we'd work on over the summer, and that meeting was always about the next step forward. But when I was 20 years old, that spring meeting went differently. What was supposed to be a conversation about my next step became the moment I shared that I was stepping away for good. That I want to see who I was apart from this game I'd loved and played and been known by my entire life. So being 6'9" or a little over 2 meters for my international listeners, the first question I typically get from anyone was, "Do you play basketball?" And for the first time in my life, that was no longer true. And it wasn't an easy break, I won't lie to you. Through loss and tears, I eventually found my footing in somewhere I never expected to be. That summer, instead of off-season workouts and preparing for the next season like I'd always found myself, I was now speaking to young athletes at camps through the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, talking to them about identity, about who they were beyond the sport. And slowly, through small groups and stages I didn't plan for, I began what I'm doing right now, learning to channel my experiences and using them to speak and encourage others, sharing that they're valuable beyond the identities they've always held and known themselves by. So for anyone who's listening, who's experiencing a loss of identity right now, whether it's a relationship change, career loss, a business that didn't make it, a health challenge that has shifted how you move through the world, hear me when I tell you your value still remains. The things that make you who you are didn't leave when the title did, when your body changed. God sees you the same way he saw those fishermen. Not for what you've lost, but for the treasure you can now carry into what's next. And that's the good news. Jesus was announcing that same news as he traveled throughout Galilee. Not just good news for crowds, but good news for an individual. Good news for people who thought their best days were behind them or that their identity was too fixed or broken to change. He was saying something new is here and it's for you. So don't be afraid when you're chosen for something larger than you feel prepared for. And don't be afraid to set down the titles and the relationships that can't go where you're going next. What's ahead of you is new, but it's also for you. God, help us to see ourselves the way you see us, chosen and loved. Amen.
I will always love you how I do. Let go of a prayer for you, just as we were.